Hello everyone, welcome to a brand new video on capillary exchange, dynamics, and the net filtration pressure. So what we're going to be looking at in this video is really what is the structure and function of a capillary, what's going on there. We're going to look a little bit at a basic capillary cross-section. We'll discuss what's going on there. Then we want to discuss the forces that are forces acting on it, the forces of action. Then we want to discuss how they result in exchange between capillaries and the interstitial fluid, then also to the tissues itself. And that's going to be what's going to cause filtration reabsorption. Then we're going to look at how to calculate a net filtration pressure and determine if filtration reabsorption will happen. So what we want to start off with is just really look at an overall capillary. Now, anatomically, if we were to look at a capillary, they are exchange vessels. So as we discuss this, we want to be thinking of this as an exchange vessel. Now, they are very small as an exchange vessel is a capillary. And so what we want to think about is their diameter is somewhere between 3 to 4 micrometers in diameter across. And so if we were to look at that and draw this kind of basic structure, you're going to have an outer layer here, very thin. This is going to reference what all epithelia have, and that's going to be the basement membrane. Remember, that's made up of a basal lamina, etc. So basement membrane here, and the basement membrane then will have epithelial cells. Now, as I draw my epithelial cells, them being simple squamous epithelium, I'm going to draw this cell and then I'm going to shade in its nucleus here just so we know that we have an epithelial cell here. Now, the next one that I'm going to draw is just going to be a component of one. Let's say we cut through it and we can't see the nucleus. It's over there somewhere else. And they are held together through cell junctions, a type of tight junction here, tight junction. So what is it that we're holding together through tight junctions? These are the endothelial cells of the capillary. Endothelial cell here is a simple squamous epithelial cell. Now, these are at least in continuous capillaries. Now, if this was the case and I was drawing another capillary here, and they were, let's say, sinusoidal capillary or any other kind of capillary, there would be gaps here. They wouldn't have the tight junctions making this fluid tight, so the fluids are going to leave because of the high forces at play here. They're not going to be leaky. So this is actually the most common type of capillary in the body, what is referred to, guys, as a continuous capillary. Now, as we go to talk about this, we want to discuss there really are some forces at play. Now, to really understand the forces at play here, what I'm going to do is I'm going to draw a little box over here, and this box is going to represent some fluid compartments that we're going to have. And on one fluid compartment here, let's say I've got some the wall of a capillary here. So let's say these are capillary cells, simple squamous epithelial cells. So this is going to represent the endothelium here. And this is going to act as a wall between plasma and another fluid called interstitial fluid. And I'm just going to abbreviate IF here, but that's going to be interstitial fluid. That is the fluid surrounding tissues. Now, remember, interstitial fluids, like all fluids, have a lot of water in them. So there is water here. And the plasma also has a lot of water in it. I mean, it is mostly water by far. So there is water in these, but one of the things that is going to be the most unique about plasma is plasma will possess lots of globular proteins and other fibrous protein. There's some proteins in here. And these proteins will carry charges, positive and negative charges on them. And since there are positive and negative charges associated to the surface of these proteins here, they are going to basically act as being hydrophilic. And if something is hydrophilic, we know that water will be attracted to them via the processes of osmosis. And this is creating a force here. Now, we also know that blood pressures, in this case, I'm going to talk about hydrostatic pressures, are also pushing from the capillaries interior out. And I'm going to call this hydrostatic pressure. So there are basically 1, 2, 3, 4 forces here at play. And the first one here is that we're going to talk about is the hydrostatic pressure that is found within the capillary. And I am now going to call this capillary hydrostatic pressure, CHP. Now, the next one that we have at play here is referred to as the hydrostatic pressure of the ICF. So the hydrostatic pressure in the interstitial fluid, the IF, interstitial fluids hydrostatic pressure. Now there is another one. Notice right here that I was talking about how water was moving towards the proteins. This creates an osmotic pressure, also called an oncotic pressure. So if we were to say the oncotic pressure here, now there is oncotic pressures found in the capillary, and there's oncotic pressures of the interstitial fluid. And when I talk about oncotic pressures, I'm going to talk about blood's colloidal osmotic pressure, or BCOP. Why? Because plasma is a colloid. Plasma is a colloid. Now, what does that mean? If plasma is a colloid, remember that a colloid is a substance that is large organic compounds that are in solution, and because these are hydrophilic proteins, hydrophilic protein, it is an organic substance, so this makes the oncotic pressure or osmotic pressure of the blood being a colloid, so we're going to call it blood's colloidal osmotic pressure. Now there are osmotic pressures in every one of these. Now to make this simple, we're only going to talk about capillary hydrostatic pressures from the outside in, from the capillary out to the interstitial fluid, and blood's colloidal osmotic pressures from the interstitial fluid into the capillary. And to keep things simple, because we're not going to get into full Starling's forces here, but it is the balance of these four forces that dictate and determine and drive the movement. Now, as I said, I want to keep this simple. So to keep this simple, I am going to draw a very basic capillary here. So let's say I have a capillary, and blood is coming out and in this capillary on these two ends. Now, blood enters a capillary bed at what is called the arterial end of a capillary. So this is where an arterial would have been. And it leaves at the end going to a venule. So here we have a venule end. Now, as we are talking about, this is in fact a capillary, and this capillary here, remember, is giving nutrients and blood and material to body tissues. So let's say I have a body tissue here. Any tissue in the body we want to think of, body tissues, peripheral tissues that are going on. Now, we know that these body tissues, they need nutrients and they produce waste and things like that. Now, what we also may know is between here we have a fluid called the interstitial fluid. An interstitial fluid is like an exchange medium. I like to think of interstitial fluid as kind of like a neutral ground. If you had two people who wanted to have a treaty they wanted to sign, they wouldn't go to the other people's country. They would find a neutral place to sign that. This is the neutral ground. It's between capillary and body tissues. So this is the fluid, the medium in which we're going to be able to exchange things. Now, the forces at play, as we said. Now, at the arterial end, we would know that, and the venular end, we know we have different pressures. And I'm going to talk about this. So we're going to have the forces at play here are going to be inside the capillary, and these forces are called the capillary hydrostatic pressures. Capillary hydrostatic pressure. This is going to be related to the blood pressure of the body in the capillary hydrostatic pressures, and it's pushing from the inside the capillary outward. Then also we need to remind ourselves that inside there are these globular proteins, primarily albumin, that is the primary factor that is generating here a force, because these proteins are making plasma colloid, and they are inside, the plasma proteins are inside. It is attracting water to the inside here, from the interstitial fluid to the capillary, called blood's colloidal osmotic pressure, BCOP. Blood's colloidal osmotic pressure. And that's forcing it's wanting to go inwards, attracted towards the hydrophilic proteins found inside this capillary, making osmosis want to go in. Remember, osmosis, it's a real hoot. Water always moves towards the greater solute. Now, what is going to happen? I want you guys to kind of remember a little ditty besides that. And my little ditty is fluid follows force. Fluid follows force. That is a way to help remember what is going on here. Now, we know at an arterial end and a venular end that there should be different pressures. We know that pressures in the bloodstream is higher in arteries and lower in veins. So at the arterial end of a capillary bed, capillary's hydrostatic pressure is going to be its highest. And it sits at 35 millimeters of mercury of pressure on average. Now, as we travel through this, you're going to notice what's going to happen, and I'm going to talk about this in a little bit, and I'm going to save the middle for the last because this really kind of helps tie it together. Near the venular end, we're going to see a massive drop where capillary hydrostatic pressures is about 18 millimeters of mercury of pressure. And blood's colloidal osmotic pressure is quite a stable thing. It is always around about 25 millimeters of mercury. And it remains stable because these proteins are always there. And I'm just going to write millimeters mercury here. And that's true for all those. We use millimeters of mercury of pressure here. Now, the only thing I didn't do is the middle one, and I'm going to talk about that. I want to do something before I do that. Now, remember, fluid follows force. You have two forces that are in opposition to each other, and fluids that are found in the capillary or the interstitial fluids will follow the greater force. Now here, because we have at the arterial end, there is 35 millimeters of mercury, and here 25 millimeters of mercury, obviously fluids will be pushed out here, any water here, and this water probably carries with it things like nutrients, like a nutrient or something like that. And that can be brought into the tissues. Tissues can take that up. And when they take that up, these tissues will also release waste products, like a waste, into the water. Now, if we notice here, 25 millimeters of mercury to 18, 25 is greater, so this liquid, this water, will want to move in, and it's going to pick up. So what do we call this when fluid leaves at the arterial end? The fancy name for this is called filtration. Filtration. And the fancy name for this when water goes into the capillary is called reabsorption. So it's reabsorption. Now you're probably wondering what's going to happen here in the middle. In the middle, the pressures drop to about 25 millimeters of mercury in the middle. Why? You've given up some of this water here, so that lowers the pressure. And what's going to happen is now water is not going to want to leave, and it's not really going to want to enter in any net way. So we say there is no net fluid movement, but when this happens, this is really when gases exchange. And it's kind of hard for me to write that in here. I'm going to try to write that gases exchange here. So this will favor gas exchange. Now that we have the numbers, so capillary hydrostatic pressure goes from 35, 25 to 18, where blood's colloidal osmotic pressure is always 25. So that's where we're going to actually end, is how does this relate to everything, and how can we do this mathematically? Now, let's talk about something called the net. Let me increase my pen size here. Net filtration pressure. Now, there will be a net movement of fluids wherever the forces are greatest. Okay? So, to do this, and I'm going to abbreviate this from here on out as NFP. So, NFP, net filtration pressure, it is equal to, if we take capillaries hydrostatic pressure and subtract that from the blood colloidal osmotic pressure, that's going to tell us that. Now, here's the deal about this, though. There is a certain value for NFP that tells us something. It isn't just what the number says, but it's what the number, if it's positive, negative, or zero. So if NFP value is positive, NFP were to be negative, or if NFP were to be zero, this tells us something about this. Now, anytime we calculate a positive NFP, filtration is going to happen. This will cause filtration. Net fluid movement will be from the capillary to the interstitial fluid. Now, if NFP is negative, well, reabsorption happens. Net fluid movement, reabsorption, and then here there will be no net movement if there is a zero. The forces are equal. So let's kind of do this and look at that. So remember, so we saw forces. We saw at the arterial end of a capillary, we saw that capillary hydrostatic pressure was 35, and BCOP, blood's colloidal osmotic pressure, was 25. So net filtration pressure would be 35 minus 25. Now, given that, this value here is equal to 10, which is a positive number. So this means that filtration happens. And if we go back here and look at that, we could see, if we did the math, we would see at that end, that's what's going on. Now, that's at the arterial end. Now, if we were to look at the venial end, at the venial end, remember, capillary hydrostatic pressure is actually 18, but blood's colloidal osmotic pressure stayed stable at 25. So we have NFP is 18 minus 25. Now, given that, we know it's going to be a negative number. It equals -7. So if this is -7, that is a negative number, and it being a negative number tells us that reabsorption happens. And of course, you could see that here in the drawing. And then lastly, in the middle of a capillary, we saw that capillary hydrostatic pressures were 25. Blood colloidal osmotic pressure was 25. And that meant if I took NFP here and I took 25 minus 25, that would be 0, and that 0 means there is no net movement of any kind of liquids whatsoever, any kind of fluids. But gases will exchange, and this is why you want to have, you don't want to have right ventricular hypertrophy. That would cause the capillary hydrostatic pressures inside the lungs to be too great and would cause problems there with gas exchange. So as we go back to look at that, you could see that this is going on. And so this also helps you understand some very important concepts, like why do patients who are hypertensive, why do they tend to get edema in certain places? Why do they have their feet swell? Well, that's because this interstitial fluid is accumulating because you're impinging reabsorption. Now, the lymphatic system does pick up any other fluids from the interstitial fluid that was not picked up by the body here. So if we failed to reabsorb some, let's say there was 5% or so that didn't get reabsorbed in a part of the body, then the lymphatics would come by and pick that up. So lymphatics help to reduce the edema. And I have a lecture on chapter 22, part 2 that I've done through my YouTube channel where I discuss that also for my course. So if you're listening to it and you're one of my students watching this video, you would know where to find that. So guys, this concludes my video on capillary dynamics, fluid movements, net filtration pressures, etc. How all this works, what's going on, and how this ultimately causes things to move at capillaries. So if you like this video, please let me know what you'd like to see in future videos. Don't forget to give it a like, give it a heart rating there, comment, subscribe. Let me know what you like, what you don't like, and I look forward to see you guys in the next one. Thank you so much, and thanks for watching.